Good.
Call to order this meeting of Susquehanna Township Board of Commissioners. We note that all commissioners are present except for Commissioners Johnson and Engel, who are excused tonight. We did meet in executive session to discuss matters permitted under law, including litigation, real estate, personnel, and logos. We will have a Pledge of Allegiance followed by a moment of silence, and the pledge tonight will be led by Commissioner Pine.
I pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. First order of business is petitions, complaints, suggestions from citizens. Do we have anybody that wishes to address the board tonight? Yes, Mr. Dries. No? Okay. Approval of minutes, January 11th, 2018, regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And the January 25th, 18 workshop meeting.
So move.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Reports of committees, Buildings and Grounds, Commissioner Rothrock.
Yes, we had a meeting of the Buildings and Grounds Committee on the 16th of January. And at that meeting, the architects met with us to discuss the cost estimate for the remodel and addition. The figure on that, the cost figure on that was $6,479,220. And we obviously had some questions about how can we get that reduced. We talked about value engineering, and their response basically was that that would be minimal reductions in the cost by doing, what they could do to substitute solid walls for glass walls and that kind of thing. Then we had some discussion about new construction, how many square feet would be necessary and so forth. And they said they felt that 30,000 square feet would probably be adequate in a new building. That's a little less than what is in these two buildings. And the cost would be about $350 a square foot, excluding land costs, which comes to $10,500,000. And then we had a discussion about the value of this building if we were to sell this building and build new. And that was estimated, I think, to be about $4 million. So that would be a net cost if we provided the ground of $6.5 million to build a new building that would suit our needs, which is about the same cost as doing the remodel. So we didn't really come to any particular conclusion as a recommendation to the board at that time. They did offer to give us a figure on remodeling without doing the addition. The addition was this meeting room was going to be put on the back in an elevated form. And they offered to work up a draft plan and estimate for that, which of course would cost us some more fees, I presume. But we didn't ask them to do that, and that's something I thought we could perhaps discuss today. So that was the upshot of that meeting. No particular conclusion, but it looks like it's about the same cost to build new if we can provide ground as it is to do the remodel.
Okay. What's the next step?
Well, we could ask them to do this other estimate if we wanted to do that, or we can start looking at a possibility of some ground. One of the options that was talked about was the ground behind Veterans Park there where the soccer field is, if we're going to be doing other recreational facilities with the state hospital grounds. That might be a possibility. It's right next to the highway department. So that's where it is. It's kind of up in the air right now.
Mr. President, if I might just add, as a member of the Building and Grounds Committee, I have to agree with Commissioner Rockroth that, when you push all these numbers around, it certainly seems that renovations to these buildings, except perhaps superficial renovations, would amount to something where you'd really be competing with the cost of a new building. And it seems to me like to go further into this study and so forth when that reality is hanging over you, I just don't know. You know, that's just one voice, one commissioner speaking, but to do a whole lot more study in an extensive renovation when you know it might be a matter of throwing good money after bad. I don't know. That seems probably a drastic way of putting it. We did need to know these kind of questions because this building has a lot of issues. It's how many years old, and I think that there's a lot of good reason to look at an improved facility or a new facility, but obviously that's a very long process and something that we may want to spend some workshop meetings to discussing perhaps.
Well, one of the considerations we talked about too was the fact that because of the size of the site, there's just not a whole lot of room to expand if we would need to do that. This proposed renovation and addition is just about as far as you're going to go without destroying the parking or whatever. So it's a very limited site situation here. Whereas, you know, another piece of ground that was larger would lead to more potential for expansion. Although I'm not sure we're really planning on expanding it significantly, but we are really hitting the limits here on this particular site if we move ahead with the renovation.
I think too that those who've worked in this building, especially for an extensive period of time, will tell you that this building is not really efficiently constructed. Whether it was the standards, architectural standards at the time, or just those who were planning it, I don't know. But you know, our hallways seem like they're wider than they need to be. You know, there's not a central location or lobby. There's just a lot of disadvantages to this building. And Commissioner Rockroth mentioned that, you know, there could be a way to do more with less floor space. And it's my understanding that anytime you're building a building, you know, it almost always comes down to floor space. As Commissioner Rockroth mentioned, you know, whether it's glass walls or stone walls or brick walls, there's not a real big difference in that, but there is a big difference in floor space. You know, the total number of square foot of a building dictates more the cost of the building than anything else. But this is something that I think is going to take a much bigger look than we found ourselves engaged in.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would like to add for contemplation that this discussion should probably include a discussion about our other longer-term projects, particularly our roadways studies, and our capital improvement projects, and our infrastructure needs. Not to conflate these topics, but one topic at X dollar value doesn't exist in a vacuum, is my only suggestion. And I liked the suggestion of having this ongoing discussion in workshops because it would give us an opportunity to rely upon staff and at the end of, for the benefit of the public and others, we had a great deal of discussions around the budget in the budget process last year about other projects and the costs that they would entail and the planning that would be incurred through the township. And I think this is a major project. We just finished a major project with the renovation and expansion of our public safety building, and it was a very successful project. But that looked at total costs in a larger context. We got a great deal of value out of that project rather than building a whole brand new firehouse for many multi-millions. We expanded what was there for much less at a higher value. If we pursue this, and I think we should, in the interests of efficiency, I would personally feel a little more comfortable not talking about one topic at a time. These are significant resource draws. And I don't think we have plans in place for the other projects, let alone this one. So food for thought. If we could maybe throw all these ideas into a hat and, I don't know, I can't believe I'm saying this, put together a strategic plan. Maybe a way to address this over 5 years and look at sources of funding and ways to plan this as part of a budget process.
Sure. Yep.
Great idea.
Would agree.
Mr. President,
Yes.
if I may, I know we've heard some background discussion on this before, but just for our residents and taxpayers that are listening and hearing about this the first time, briefly, if we could maybe let them know what the impetus is, because they may not have any idea for discussions of a new building. Just some background, because they might be wondering.
Do you want to do that, Dave?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I think the commissioners probably could jump in, as appropriate. As I think Commissioner Pine had noted, I mean, the layout of this building from an organizational perspective, it's very, very fragmented. It's not necessarily conducive to kind of collaborative working space. Those were some of the things that were initially being thought about. Again, we had engaged a professional, somebody with extensive experience in the area of municipal spaces in particular, to look at ways to address some of those issues. From some of the capital assets in this building, HVAC components, those kinds of things. As the commissioner had noted, this building was dedicated in 1987. Much of those materials are original materials to this building. So there is going to be some need to invest in those kind of component systems. Obviously, there's been great strides from an efficiency perspective in all of those areas. So those are areas that we started looking at. And again, we went into this with no obviously predetermined conclusion as to what was going to come out. I think the engagement of a professional to look at this was to make sure that we were doing it comprehensively, at least as it relates to making decisions, as opposed to piecemealing it and ultimately creating additional costs moving forward. So those were some of the some of the motivations and some of the motivating factors. Just in terms of engagement, and again, not to focus on a single room, but we have limited opportunity for kind of public engagement in this space, obviously from an audio-video perspective, because of the time period in which it was constructed, the design of this. Not to suggest that we have large crowds, but it would be helpful if folks that were sitting in our audience or watching on television, had the ability to really see some of the materials that the commissioners have, as you're rendering decisions and making decisions. So the issue of engagement and kind of community engagement and public engagement in your decision-making process was also one of the motivating factors in at least looking at this from a comprehensive perspective. But again, nothing predetermined or pre-concluded, just making sure that as we're devoting resource, whether it be a couple $1,000s here or there, that we are being strategic, that we are being comprehensive, and we're being mindful of the impacts that one decision has on subsequent decisions. And that was really the motivation for the Building and Grounds Committee, I think, to engage a professional that has experience in this area. So that kind of gives, a brief kind of synopsis of some of the thinking in terms of engaging a firm like this. And if other commissioners want to add, that's fine as well.
I would just add, based on our meetings and discussions, and they were extensive as part of this study that Commissioner Rockroth just referred to, the problems with this building are many. It would relate to everything, including the lack of accessibility. We do have elevators, that's a good thing, but getting in the front door is a problem. With a person in a wheelchair, there is no mechanized, opening of a door or button to push to open a door. There's even just in the electronics of the room and so forth. Every meeting notice that we send out has a reference to calling ahead, I think a week or so, to make arrangements if you happen to be disabled. And I thought that was crazy that somebody would have to make such plans if you're attending just a simple meeting as a disabled person. But there's infrastructure issues. I mean, I can hardly hear some of the people in this room because of air conditioning unit above my head, and that's one. We've got security issues that are significant. When people come into here, they can sometimes end up in areas that they don't belong, areas that they don't even realize aren't public areas. It's just the building design, the building infrastructure, the building, its age, and even just government was run differently, 30 years ago when they were putting this building together than it runs today.
Right.
And I think the government runs more efficiently today than it did 30 years ago, and I think the building needs to reflect that. But it's obviously the decision of all the commissioners and the public at large, but I think the public would want a township building that serves them much better.
Well, we are doing a comprehensive plan, and we have other things going on that are going to be in that plan, and including this corridor and the hospital grounds, and I presume some other things. So it's probably good to look at this in the context of an overall plan, long-term plan, as was said here. So wasn't my intention to solve this problem at this meeting. I just wanted to maybe have a little more discussion, and so that concludes my report.
Almost as long as Commissioner Sanderson's tends to be. Well, more to come, it's safe to say on that. And we'd be remiss if we didn't look at our options, in terms of this building and potential other buildings and, our needs, perhaps the needs of the school district. World is our oyster in terms of possibilities and potential. And I'd like to thank all of you for keeping an eye on this and exploring it. Not always going to hit a home run, but sometimes it's always worth trying.
Well, now we know there's some numbers anyway.
Yes, we know some numbers, and they're interesting numbers. Thank you. All right, thanks for that report. Budget and Finance.
No report. I think I just gave mine. Thank you.
It's a little long, isn't it?
Do you want to mention the?
Sorry, yes. Being a little too flip. The township, of course, and the authority are working very closely. And the authority has received the presentation, and the township has materials available to it, which I will ask Mr. Kratzer to explain. But in short order, we have an opportunity to alleviate some financial burden on operations by changing the way we finance sewer operations. And with that, I'll turn that over to Mr. Kratzer.
Sure, and there's going to be additional conversation. This is actually an item that we intend to have conversation at your February workshop meeting on. But the Budget and Finance Committees of both the Township and the Authority had met jointly. It was a joint public meeting that they had on February the 2nd, in which there was some discussion about opportunities that exist to refinance some of the existing debt that the authority has, particularly two issues: the 2013 and 2016 series, which are bank loans, which have initial fixed rates that eventually transition to variable rates. So there's interest rate risk involved, some of which could potentially be significant. Recognizing that we're still at a point from a historic perspective where interest rates are as low as they've been from a historical perspective, there were questions as to the appropriateness of bearing that interest rate risk. Why would an entity that has the creditworthiness of both the authority and the township continue to potentially have this exposure to interest rate risk, given the climate that we have from an economic perspective? So we started a conversation with folks from RBC Capital Markets, which is an underwriting company or underwriter, really a global underwriter, if you will, to talk about the elimination of interest rate risk. That conversation transitioned to issues related to the indenture in which the authority issues debt, which is very much reflective of not a modern indenture document. So, for example, there's coverage requirements that are provided for in that indenture. So what the authority has to do from a budgetary perspective is not only do they budget their debt service, but they're budgeting an additional 20%. There's a coverage requirement in there. So there's certain inefficiencies in terms of the structure of how we're operating and how we're issuing debt. So there was some conversation recognizing that the township has, historically guaranteed that debt through a guarantee agreement, and in turn is assuming certain risk by virtue of the guarantee agreement. Is there a way to potentially issue debt as general obligation debt, and then the authority and the township enter into what's called a subsidy agreement? And, in turn, there would be no additional exposure to the township. What there would be is there would be savings that would be able to be provided to the ratepayers of the authority system, which, again, is essentially limited, is limited to the constituents of this community. They're not providing service to anyone beyond this. So there were some questions about structure and efficiency of borrowing and the costliness of the current borrowing structure and opportunities to potentially reduce those costs without imposing any additional risk burden on the township government. So folks from RBC will be here at your February meeting, in addition to representatives from McNeese Wallace, who's proposed to serve as bond counsel in the transaction if it was to proceed, as well as a representative from Concord Public Finance, who's been your FA or your financial advisor in past transactions, to talk about this, again, with no predetermined conclusion, but to present this to the full board, just similar to how it was presented to the Budget and Finance Committees. I think the recommendation of both bodies at that point, based on what they heard, was to proceed with this conversation, recognizing that there are certain advantages, both from a township perspective and an authority perspective. And the two organizations are working as closely together as they ever have. So that's kind of a highlight. Again, there'll be much more detail at your your workshop meeting at the end of February, in which they'll be able to provide you with both the analysis that they've done, demonstrating the risk associated with this interest rate risk, and the efficiency of the proposed structure. So that's kind of a summary. I don't know if there were a number of other members there that may be able to add to that.
I think the most important thing to remember that I heard at our joint meeting is that by changing the way the debt is handled, ratepayers could expect to receive a significant relief. And that is not just a soft dollar approach, but it's also a hard dollar approach in the way that money is handled on a daily basis with the township and the authority. So it's new, it's innovative, it lowers risk, and it lowers costs in a significant way. We can go into that with more detail at our second meeting in February, but I certainly think it's worthwhile to consider strongly.
When you say ratepayers could see some relief, I don't think you mean to say
Lowering,
that
no.
there's lower rates in the offing. If anything, it would take some pressure off the upward pressure
Indeed.
on potential rate increases.
Federal.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, Mr. President. So much of the authorities, I'm sorry, Commissioner, but so much of the authority's budget, is uncontrollable, quite frankly. It's either mandated from a regulatory perspective in terms of meeting certain obligations there, and a significant portion relates to disposal costs, which is paid ultimately to CRW because we have no treatment facility. Both of which are outside of our control, quite frankly. This is something that we do have control over. This is something that would provide, maybe not immediate relief, but certainly flexibility moving forward. And as the President had noted, perhaps relieve some of the upward pressure as it relates to those rates. Again, it's the Commissioner notes it's innovation. It's a new way to look at it. But many of RBC's clients will tell you that or RBC will tell you that many of its clients are issuing GO debt for these kinds of things. Again, it's not reducing the borrowing capacity of the township in any fashion. So when we're talking about large capital projects that the township has moving forward, it's like I said, it's not imposition of any additional risk because you have risk by virtue of the guarantee agreement anyway. So it's an opportunity to create some flexibility from a budgetary perspective and also from an operational perspective.
The esoteric part of this discussion was something I hadn't concerned myself with for a long time, is that this new structure would actually lend some legal flexibility to the township and the authority. The current structure was created in the 70s, so 50 years ago. And the way debt is handled and paid is archaic. So the new way would be more modern and current and flexible. That's it.
All right, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Sanderson before we roll along?
Not really a question, just a comment, if I may. Not to oversimplify, but basically we're talking about refinancing the loans at a lower interest rate, which will lead to a savings for ratepayers, as well as the 20% that the authority won't need to hold in reserve. They'll be able to use those funds instead to do projects. Again, not to oversimplify it, but to make it clear and easy to understand.
Essentially it, yep.
Yep.
All right, Public Works, Commissioner Napper.
Yes, Mr. President. The Public Works Department report for the month of January. Besides performing PMCS preventive maintenance checks and service to the equipment, the Public Works Department installed new signs, repaired damaged signs, and hauled several tree limbs due to the recent snowstorms to the Woody Waste area in Edgemount. The Public Works Department maintained more than 100 miles of township roadway and alleyways, so I ask that you be patient with them. And as a final note, Mr. President, the Public Works Department is now in the ice and snow control mode, hauling anti-skid and patching potholes throughout the township. And due to the harsh winters this year, we are seeing an increase in the number of potholes over the mild winters of this over several last year. The Public Works crew is out doing pothole repairs this week with cold mix. Hot mix is not available at this time of the year, but in the springtime, we'll use the hot mix available and we'll make permanent restoration. Should a township resident want to report a pothole, they may do so by calling 717-545-4751 or use the township website at susquehannatownship.com. This ends my report, Mr. President.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner. Health and Sanitation, Commissioner Rabarchak.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is no scheduled yard waste pickup by Penn Waste for the month of February. Collection will resume Saturday, March 17th, in honor of President Lynch's birthday. Also, on a more serious note, the township would like to remind residents to remove all snow and ice from sidewalks within 24 hours of snowfall ending. We've received quite a few calls from neighbors and complaints. We want to make sure that our children have a safe and clear path as they walk to the bus stops and schools. So we thank you for cooperating and making sure your sidewalks are clear.
Begora. Thank you. Administration and Personnel, Commissioner Napper.
No report at this time, sir.
Police, do we have anything, Chief? Yes, sir. Commissioner, relevant commissioners are not in. Fire and EMS, Commissioner Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Briefly, the Public Safety Committee held a meeting on January 17th. The township has applied for Department of Homeland Security assistance to firefighter grants in the amount of $150,000. This would pay for roughly 50 sets of turnout gear, and it's a pretty expensive proposition. So certainly, if we were to get that grant funding, it would offset those costs. And the state has passed a law expanding the agencies which can use Narcan, which is an agent that can help reverse the effects of heroin overdose. And it's my understanding that Rescue and Progress Fire Companies personnel will now have Narcan as well as the EMS and our police. So, that gives us a greater opportunity to be able to save people. And unfortunately, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we have had 68 instances
No, sir. 68?
of overdose. You gave us maps recently.
That came, I believe, from EMS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was from EMS, of course, yeah.
But it was township wide.
It was township,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it was 68 last year and 67 in 2016 or something like that. So unfortunately it's a steady figure, and far too many. So it's an issue that all of our emergency services personnel can now combat. Finally, we'd like to thank a generous benefactor for a gift of $2,500 in scholarship grants, which will provide resources to our volunteer firefighters who are attending college. So we thank that generous benefactor for the gift. That concludes my report.
You don't want to name the benefactor? Require anonymity?
They're anonymous at this point. So.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Recreation, Commissioner Barczyk, do you have anything?
Just briefly, that we are beginning to accept applications for the summer parks program, and you can find applications online on the township website or contact the recreation office.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Planning and Zoning, Commissioner Rothrock.
I'll try to be a little shorter than this one. There was a planning commission meeting held on January 22nd. Neither I nor Commissioner Barczyk was able to attend that, but our Director of Community and Economic Development was kind enough to give me a little write-up, so I'll tell you what happened. There was one main item on the agenda, which was a minor subdivision plan for Iron Off Road in the R1 zone. It was to subdivide one tract into three tracts, 3 dwelling lots. And all 3 properties are accessed off Iron Off Road. 2 waivers were requested, one for preliminary plan requirements and the other for having to post security for shade trees and sidewalks. They're going to instead recommend that the certificate of occupancy not be issued until the sidewalk and the shade trees are installed. There were some concerns about stormwater management, but the Planning Commission recommended approval of the 2 waivers and the plan with conditions related to the sidewalk extension and stormwater management. They also talked about the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission and offering a zoning administration course in March. And there was an update on the drone parking survey. Based on that preliminary survey, the majority of the parking lots in the township have vacant parking spaces between 20 and 50%. And they are going to do additional flyovers during peak times before they finish the data on that. But that's an interesting study that's being done, possibly being able to reduce some of the impervious surface in the township. And that concludes my report.
Good, thank you. All right, bids and agreements. T.R. Stoner, General Contractor, Veterans Park Improvement Project, authorization to proceed or process application payment number 1.
Okay.
Mr. Kratzer or Mr. Grubik?
I'll take that, Thank you, Mr. President, Board of Commissioners. As the board is aware, we are well underway in the Veterans Park Improvement Project. The contractor, T.R. Stoner, has submitted his first application for payment, and that includes items related to mobilization, demolition, some grading, and some basic beginning of the project. The total project is an amount of $511,400, and this particular request for payment, which is the first one, is in the amount of $60,673.50, and I would recommend that the board approve the request.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comment?
I just, Mr. Gruber, could you give us that total number once more? I'm sorry, I missed
The
it.
total project?
Yes.
$511,400.
And he's requesting 61.
$60,673.50.
Any other comment or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Ordinances, resolutions, et cetera. Ordinance 1804, which would designate a stop sign on Harwood Drive for eastbound traffic at the intersection with Wilhelm Road. This is a Ward 5 issue, right?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner. Yes, Mr. President.
This one near Circle School?
Yes, yes. In fact, there's concern there that there's some traffic going directly from Harwood into Circle School, crossing what is a flow of traffic that could be hazardous. Plus, you've got the ecumenical center there, where vehicles are turning left in the ecumenical center. So we're trying to emphasize that it's important for safety to stop there regardless. So we're stopping all traffic. As I've said to Chief, maybe in the future we might consider perhaps a right turn, keep moving sign, perhaps. But for now, this is a proposal for just a regular stop sign, one location, one direction, eastbound on Harwood as it meets Wilhelm. And I would make a motion, we approve it.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2 is Ionoff Road. And Ms. Logan, care to take this one for us?
This is a final subdivision plan for the purpose of subdividing one existing 4.15 acre parcel into 3 separate single-family dwelling lots. The property is located on the north side of Ionoff Road, between Buxton Road and Bonita Court. The property is zoned R1, low-density residential. The plan was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission contingent upon the approval of the following waivers. Number 1, waive the preliminary plan requirement. Number 2, financial security is to be waived prior to plan recording. However, no occupancy permit for the homes will be issued until street trees and sidewalk are installed along the frontage of the lots and along the north side of Ionoff Road for approximately 100 feet east of the tract to connect to the existing sidewalk. The developer shall contact Paxton Crossing Homeowners Association shall contact Paxton Crossing Homeowners Association prior to installation of the sidewalk extension. Also, the developer or builder shall install stormwater management facilities in accordance with the township ordinances for all 3 lots prior to the issuance of occupancy permits. I don't know if you want to take the waivers first, or do you do it all?
Mr. President, I move to adopt suggestion number 1 and 2.
Second?
Okay, the motion is to waive the preliminary plan and to set forth the standards that Betsy outlined in terms of financial security.
I do have a quick question.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Yes.
Yeah, what's the impetus for number 2? To waive the financial security? Is that because that's something we do as a
The
regular?
developer requested this because of the fact that it's only a 3-lot subdivision, and the only public improvements that are to be made under our ordinance relate to street trees and sidewalk. And actually, this particular situation, it actually works better than a bond or letter of credit because it guarantees essentially that there can be no occupancy of the homes until the sidewalks and street trees are installed.
Okay.
So in this particular case, this is not a one-size-fits-all, but in this particular case, we felt that it was a more efficient way to handle the improvement guarantee as opposed to having a written agreement making a condition of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the other thing to note is that, the developer, as a condition of this waiver, is also extending sidewalk beyond the developer's property. So we're
We're actually getting a little more than we're entitled to.
Correct, that is correct. So we're making a connection between the proposed installed sidewalk and an existing sidewalk network, so that there's not a gap there. So
Great.
there's a little trade-off in that
Little
regard.
negotiation. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the conditions and/or waivers been moved for passage and seconded. Do I have, is there any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. President, just wondering,
Yes.
whatever that thump was on the roof, if that's the building collapsing, then we should definitely renovate.
Or
When the world was-
rebuild?
Is there a second?
Yeah.
That was it, John.
Want to
gonna say,
continue, Ms. Logan?
Sorry.
Santa's a little late or a little early, depending on
Not
your
the first time I've
perspective.
heard that noise, I'm just saying. The planning commission has also attached the following conditions for approval of the plan. 1, provide a copy of the signed sewage planning module revision or exemption request. 2, provide letter of intent to serve or agreements with all applicable utilities and authorities, including sewer service. 3, extend proposed sidewalk to meet existing sidewalk on Ionoff Road. And 4, satisfy all remaining HRG, Dauphin County, and Township staff comments.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and the motion is to approve the plan with those conditions. Any comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. And next up is the grease trap waiver. Who wants to address that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that quickly.
Okay.
Again, the owner of Dam Donuts, which is, sorry. Which is, it's Bob, he's giggling over here. I can't help it. But,
donuts.
no, it's a proposed donut shop within the Blue Mountain Commons Shopping Center down on Lingelstown Road. They're requesting relief from the requirement to install a minimum-sized grease trap of 1,000 gallons. Instead, they're proposing the installation of what was initially going to be a 22-gallon grease trap. However, they're actually upsizing that slightly to 35 gallons capacity grease trap. And again, this is generally consistent with the practice that they have in place. Given the extent of the nature of their operation and the equipment that they're utilizing for purposes of cooking the donuts and processing the donuts, it's consistent with their practice at a location that they own in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. The authority engineer has reviewed the request. He's reviewed the technical aspects of the request. He's recommending approval of the request, condition upon the circumstances relative to operating conditions of this store. The authority reviewed the request at their January meeting. And also recommended approval condition upon execution of a declaration of understanding and acceptance of conditions, which again outlines, was prepared by the authority solicitor and outlines kind of the operating conditions in which were relayed to us by the operator, and recognizing that if operational conditions would change, there would be a requirement to meet the requirements under the township's grease trap ordinance.
Mr. President, I think it's worth noting that this is not the first time this request for waiver has come to the township. 2 or 3 occasions, township ordinance requires a 1,000-gallon grease trap, which is a standard, and it's a very large standard. This is a very reasonable request, and it's right along the lines of the other exceptions that have been requested and granted in the past.
And it was studied by the engineer for the authority as well.
Correct. I mean, there was interface with not only the applicant, but also with the Bellefonte, Pennsylvania Sewer Authority
Right.
to address any grease-related issues materializing or potentially materializing from their location in Bellefonte, and he felt comfortable with the request. Again, given the nature of the operation and how they're essentially cooking the donuts.
Bellefonte is where the other location is for
That is
Dam
correct.
Donut.
That is
That's
correct. Yep.
Okay. And we dealt with this before with pizza, other units. Yeah,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
maybe the most recent that
I
I
think there was a
recall
pizza shop.
was the sausage place in
Yes.
Paxton Church.
Yes, that's right.
Puglisi Brothers Sausage, where they really weren't cooking the sausage, if you will, at the location. It was more of a retail kind of outlet for
Right.
the sale of sausage. So I think that was the most recent one that this board and the authority board would have dealt with. But both Commissioner Napper and Commissioner Sanderson are correct that this has come before the both boards in the past.
Do they have an opening date in mind?
April.
It all depends on how this vote goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Proposed for April. I have
And
a
samples.
few questions.
Can we,
I
did we
realize.
make a motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
I realize we've approved exceptions in the past, as you mentioned, maybe like a pizza shop or things like that, where they're not necessarily frying foods. Are the donuts fried?
The donuts are fried, but the unit is essentially a self-contained unit with its own kind of cleaning mechanism and collection mechanism. So that's what they're, and they have, regular maintenance through, a Kleins or somebody of that nature to come in and take the food waste. They're not dumping it down the.
So are you saying there's limited ability for grease to enter the sewage system because of the
Because of the
The
method, in which-
equipment?
the method of, and
Yeah.
the equipment that they're utilizing,
Okay.
yes, yep, that is correct.
Because they had mentioned in their letter that the only food they were serving is donuts.
Correct.
And if,
Is it
if,
any donuts?
well,
Are they
regardless, I thought if that's the only food they're serving, certainly they're doing
Donuts
a
are
lot of
grease- are-
frying,
are-
yeah.
are grease
But
intensive,
if
yes,
it's
yeah.
the equipment that
It-
makes that
it's-
possible.
It's the
Okay.
equipment that makes that possible, that is correct. Yep.
Any other Dan comments? Any other comments?
Damn donuts.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to resolutions. 18R04, which would appoint Dauphin County Treasurer as the collector and depository for the purpose of receiving and collecting real estate taxes for Susquehanna Township.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments or questions?
Yes.
Yes.
This is an excellent relationship the township has with Dauphin County Treasurer's Office. It'll continue for another 2 years. It saves the taxpayers a lot of money simply because of the efficiencies of the service. It's an excellent relationship.
Very good. Anybody else?
This is continuing a relationship that has been in effect.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, but it's made necessary to address again because the person who won the write-in campaign for tax collector in November has decided not to pursue occupying the office. Right. So we need to reformalize and reestablish the relationship with Janice Creason in the county. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And Resolution 18R05, authorizing the township manager to execute the multimodal fund grant reimbursement agreement for bicycle and pedestrian facilities for the Union Deposit Road Sidewalk Extension Project.
Move.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Donuts on the bottom.
Flavor. Donuts. All right, reports of staff. Mr. Kratzer, do you have anything?
I do not, Mr. President.
Good. Chief, do you have anything tonight? All right. Our solicitor represented tonight by Mark Wedenauer.
No, Mr. President.
Do you have anything? Okay. Mr. Spriggs, anything from the Public Works Department?
No, sir.
All good? Thank you. School Board, Commissioner Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to mention something briefly. Due to the recent snow days, school will now be in session on Friday, February 16th, Wednesday, Wednesday, March 28th, and Thursday, March 29th.
Mean man.
So they're
Stop praying for snow.
cutting into that spring break. So enjoy the snow days, kids.
You're just rubbing it in, man.
No, I mean,
Catch up to you, karma.
I had a great time.
Are you going to get hate mail?
Yeah, probably.
Send all
so.
hate mail.
That concludes my report, Mr.
Mr.
President.
Fleming. All right, Authority, Mr. Sanderson.
No. Report. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Just like a blanket. No.
No. Indian Wheels, Commissioner Rabarchak.
Yes, I do have an Indian Wheels report. I'd just like to share, we have a 2017 year-end summary of the amount of services provided, just to give you a snapshot of the service these volunteers provide in the township. They've traveled over 16,000 miles in 2017, over 2,000 client trips, over 2,600 volunteer hours, and 51 new clients. So again, that's an all-volunteer organization that provides rides to seniors, and we thank them for their service.
Very good.
And I do have, if I may, Mr. President, I have briefly on shade tree next. In addition to the environmental benefits of trees, I just wanted to share, according to the U.S. Forest Service, each dollar spent on planting and caring for community trees results in benefits of 2 to 5 times the initial investment. And if you're interested in having a shade tree planted in the tree lawn of your property by the Township Shade Tree Commission, the applications can be found on the Township website. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner. Communications, Commissioner Pine?
Yes, Mr. President, the Communications Committee today heard a presentation from Gavin Company, a public relations firm, and regarding branding services, specifically efforts to market the township, including both the commercial and residential prospects, as well as kind of unifying our message, perhaps our logo, perhaps our seal. And I'd ask that maybe this whole issue be brought in front of all the commissioners at our next workshop meeting, if it would be okay with you.
Yeah, great idea. Let's do it.
That's all I have to report, Mr. President.
Okay. Very good. Did I skip something?
No, sir.
Okay. You never know. All right, on to new business. Boards and commissions, we still have a couple of vacancies. We should concentrate first, I think, though, on our comprehensive plan and community advisory committee that we're looking to establish to guide the whole process of having a look at our community.
I'd like to thank you all for submitting people to be on the committee. I just wanted to read off the nominees. Heather Jackson, Joe Robinson, Ray Davis, Bub Manning, John Dietrich, Jonathan Thomas, Mike Beal, Vicki Shannon, and Mary Powell. In addition to those, we have representatives from the Tri-County Planning Commission. Jerry Duke has agreed to be on it. Jim McGraw will be representing the Planning Commission for the township. We have two developers, Tricia McGilton and Catherine Prince, and we also have Tyler Good from Creedic who will be on the committee. So, if anyone has any questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a really good mix. So,
okay.
thanks again.
And when is the first meeting?
Right now, it's proposed for February 21st. I do know one of the committee members can't make that meeting, so we might throw out another date, but we're trying to do it like on a Wednesday or Tuesday night.
Okay.
So now that we have everybody, everyone's contact information, we'll send out a meeting notice.
Okay.
So,
I would just note that this has been a very good process. You know, each of the commissioners has had the opportunity to name somebody, either from their ward or in another ward, but somebody who brings a unique insight into the process. And in addition, staff has had some recommendations, and it's a good mix. So, yeah, if anybody else wants to, before our next meeting, have some, or before the first meeting of that, just get your nominations and thoughts to Betsy or Mr. Kratzer. Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have vacancies yet for the Recreation Advisory Board. Is that a particular ward, Mr. Kratzer, or is that the at-large?
That is the at-large.
Okay. So that's open. We still have an opening for alternate for the Zoning Hearing Board. We don't need to do these tonight. I'm just bringing them to your attention. We do have an opening on the Planning Commission. And we also have a Shade Tree Commission opening. And I know we have at least one person in the pipeline who may be interested in it.
Yes.
So definitely pursue that.
Well,
Ready?
I'm prepared to make a nomination
Sure.
tonight, if that'd be acceptable.
Absolutely.
Okay. I would like to nominate Ray Davis to the Shade Tree Commission. He expressed an interest, and he also has a degree in horticulture, so he has somewhat of a background.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Great.
Mr. Kratzer.
I don't know if there was going to be any discussion. There was also a nomination that came through relative to the Planning Commission for Mr. Brian Moore. I don't know if you want to speak about that now or not, whether you want to consider other folks.
I mean, has the resume come through?
Yes, yep. And I can distribute it broader than I think I had sent it to the liaison commissioners, so I think Commissioner Rothrock, Commissioner Barczyk, Commissioner Pine. I think the initial inquiry came through Commissioner Engel, and I think I copied you as well, Mr. President.
I think you did. Yeah.
But again, just not that it has to be acted upon, at this point, but just to make you aware that there is somebody that has expressed an interest in serving in that capacity. That's all.
Yeah, I don't remember the particulars, but he seemed to be very well qualified for it.
Yeah, he's I think an HVAC engineer, so obviously somebody that's, I don't know the gentleman either, but accustomed from a professional perspective, looking at plans, reviewing plans, looking at details on plans. He does serve currently on our property maintenance board, Property Maintenance Code Board of Appeals. Now, again, that body is not very active. We don't deal with many property maintenance code appeals, but he does serve in that capacity currently, but has expressed an interest in the opportunity to potentially be engaged in the Planning Commission process.
I haven't had conversation with him. Obviously, he's sponsored through Commissioner Engel. He used to be my neighbor, so he moved from my neighborhood to Fred's neighborhood, and my experience with him is that he's conscientious and professionally qualified. Certainly, the board can act on filling the vacancy at any time, but if you wanted to know a little bit about him, at least two of us do. He'd be very well qualified.
So what's the pleasure of the board? Want to have a look at the resume and then vote on them in the zoning hearing board, or?
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever the board's pleasure, obviously. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose Mr. Moore as he has expressed an interest, that's all.
So we have the Recreation Advisory Board, Zoning Hearing Board, alternate, Planning Commission, and that would do it. Okay. Maybe we can pick them up at the
It's fine.
the workshop meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. That's it for new business. Commissioner comments? Anybody wish to comment? Nope.
I'd like to congratulate the Philadelphia Eagles on winning the Super Bowl. I'm not an Eagles fan,
You're
but
stealing Tom's thunder.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
Here we go.
someone's got some swag on the dais here.
Yeah.
So
Midnight Green.
That's right.
congratulations, Commissioner Pine.
Thank you. There you go, Tom. Most of my family's down at the parade today, and hopefully they're all back safe now.
You said congratulations to St. John's University as well? Is that?
Oh, wow. All right.
Move on.
Moving on to the agenda.
I forgot about that.
Sharper than a
connection.
serpent's
Approval
tooth.
of report of bills
There'll
paid.
be a storm in the
Mr.
manager's office here.
President, I move to accept the report of bills paid in the amount of $541,008.19.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to adjourn.
It's been motioned and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are out of here.